I wasn't sure about doing this, but I mean, people on my YouTube channel really wanted to see this, I guess. For anyone who doesn't know me, I'm SCXCR. I'm a longtime Bloody Roar fan. I did a retrospective on the entire series plus the manga some years ago. A lot of those videos haven't aged well. I'm currently translating and editing the Japan-only Bloody Roar the Fang manga into English, and the first 3 chapters are available on mangadex.org. I also manage 4 out of the 5 speedrun.com leaderboards for the Bloody Roar games, and am somewhat of an archivist/collector of Bloody Roar. When I say archivist/collector, I mean that this is what part of my living room looks like. Once upon a time, Matt McMuscles, who was part of the Best Friends group, and then they all split off into their individual things, Matt did a retrospective of the Bloody Roar games, one that is several hours shorter than mine, and I remember there being a few things wrong with it back then, and I think I commented on it, but I otherwise left this alone. But I'm coming back to it for reasons that I'll get into later. For now though, let's just start watching the video, and I'll stop and make comments as we go.
While in Japan and Europe it was called Bloody Roar Hyper Beast Duel, for whatever reason Hudson Soft felt the name wouldn't fly in America, where it was instead known as Beasterizer, which I get misty-eyed whenever I hear that Beasterizer. It's such an inverse of what you'd expect.
I've tried looking for things like movies, music albums, or songs, or artists that had the name Bloody Roar or something very close to it. I didn't find exact matches, but it's possible that they tried changing the name to try and avoid any of those sorts of disputes. That's just an educated guess on my part, though. I'm not sure about that.
Bloody Roar presented a fast-paced but simplified style of brawling when compared to its contemporaries. It was a bit easier to understand as it didn't have nearly the amount of moves offered by, say, Tekken, but rather was pushing its gimmick right into your face.
The thing with Bloody Roar is the inputs for the moves are usually a little different than you'd be used to with another type of fighter.
This played into the story as well, with the vaguely evil Tylon Corporation holding a tournament to see just who was the strongest Animorph.
There was no tournament in Bloody Roar 1, and I have no idea where this comes from. I assume Matt did some research for this, but a lot of this video, if I remember correctly, it sounds like he tried doing it strictly from memory. And like, I've been guilty of doing that in the past. I stopped doing it because I kept misremembering things. So everything I do, I try to double and triple check. But yeah, Tylon Corporation or Tyrone Corporation or Tyrone Corporation, whichever translation you're looking at the time, never held a tournament.
They would then brainwash the winner into being a foot soldier for their own private army, which would no doubt do some dirty deeds.
That's not how that works either. So the premise of Bloody Roar 1 is you have the Tylon or Tyron or Tyrone Corporation that is doing a bunch of experimentation to weaponize zoanthropes. You have certain characters in the game who are agents of Tylon, and you have other characters in the game who are searching for missing family members or have otherwise been disaffected by Tylon's actions. So not only has Matt completely misremembered what Bloody Roar 1 is about, but he's actually undermined just how much is actually going on in the game.
Hey, Zoanthropes, it's a corporation sponsoring a fighting game tournament. Stay the fuck away! They're evil. It's very obvious. Shadowloo, Ultratech, Mishima Zaibatsu, the Howard Connection. There's a pattern here.
This is what makes this mistake so egregious, is that he keeps coming back to it throughout the course of the video. And it ends up being the basis of much of the humor that he tries to do through this section and a couple of the subsequent games. This actually reminds me of someone that I used to communicate with who also made videos about video games. He was doing a video about a game. I won't say which one and I won't say who it is, but a lot of the humor in the video was derived on how bad of a job the game developer did with making the game, to the point that there was a song at the end about how bad a job they did. Problem was, they didn't develop the game. They merely published it, and someone entirely different developed it. So as a result, they wound up looking like a complete idiot. I actually like Matt's work, particularly the What Happened videos, and I don't doubt for a second that he's a Bloody Roar fan, but man, you gotta do your research, even if you think you just know it off the top of your head, because you've gotta be sure.
There's also an end boss as well. There's Yuriko, the woman?
Did he go to the Paul Lighting School of Pronunciation? I mean, I can't fault him too much for that, because they did canonize it in Extreme and Primal Fury, but usually it's Uriko.
If you're interested in checking out this first Bloody Roar, it's still available digitally on the PS3.
So it is available digitally, but I don't recommend downloading it, because in my experience, that and Bloody Roar 2 have major problems with lag because of how the game was emulated. So you're probably better off just emulating it or trying to find a physical copy.
Released in 1999 for the arcade, although, I mean, I'm just gonna have to take Hudson Soft's word for it, because I've never, ever seen this one out in the wild.
I have an arcade PCB of Bloody Roar 2, plus a bunch of the graphics for the arcade cab. It was in the arcades.
I have cut a lot of you. Wendell is cut. Rudy is cut. Janie, you're gone. Steven, I like your hustle. That's why it was so hard to cut you.
A Simpsons reference will get me right in the heart every single time. I realize that's not related to Bloody Roar, but I do like that. Something he doesn't really mention, though, is that a lot of the moves from those characters were co-opted and then given either to existing characters or the new characters that were introduced here or later in the series. Like, the one that sticks in my mind in particular is Jenny has some moves from Fox, Kronos from Primal Fury and Extreme has some moves from Fox, Stun adopts some moves from Mitsuko, I believe?
And Bakuryu the Mole, now bishified.
I realize that's a joke, but what really happened is the first Bakuryu died, and then the second Bakuryu was a child that Yugo rescued from Tylon Corporation, who eventually gets brainwashed into becoming Bakuryu the second. That whole saying things as a joke and then people taking it seriously thing is something that will come up again later on.
Yuriko going from a weird kid-woman thing into a sort of cat-girl thing.
So the story behind that is Uriko was one of the Tylon experiments where she could turn into a chimera form. But after getting out of Tylon's influence, she finds herself unable to fully transform into her proper beast form again, and instead just has this half-cat thing.
Finally, there's my girl, Marvel the Leopard.
I will fight you over Marvel, Matt. Not kidding. Well, I am kidding, because even if we did fight over her, regardless of who wins, she would want nothing to do with either of us.
Triggering these completely drains your beast gauge of beast energy, reverting you to your non-beast form, whether they whiff or not. This lends a bit of strategy into their usage, as it leaves you at an incredible disadvantage if you do botch it.
Just wanted to point out, that's one of the things I actually like about Bloody Roar 2, and I'm glad that he mentioned it. Because when you get to Extreme, you get people just going into the beast form and hypering all the time, and it becomes really tiring. Of course, that looks wonderful compared to Bloody Roar 4, but that's further down the line.
The story, such as it is, tries to justify having another tournament with the most threadbare of reasons.
There's no tournament in Bloody Roar 2 either, and you could maybe excuse it in the first game because when you go into arcade mode, there's absolutely no explanation for what's going on. But in Bloody Roar 2, there's a story mode, and that story mode includes a long set of paragraphs about what exactly is happening, and there is no tournament whatsoever.
What the last tournament actually did, however, was reveal the existence of zoanthropes to the world, which is...
Again, there was no tournament in the first game.
Thus, the ZLF, or Zoanthrope Liberation Front, is established to protect the interests of furries and scalies alike.
The ZLF is actually a terrorist organization. I mean, sort of presents itself as doing that, but it quite obviously is not a friendly group. For example, Uriko's character arc in this game starts with seeing her mother get kidnapped by the ZLF. Again, that makes me wonder if Matt just wrote this entirely from memory and just had other people record and edit the footage for him.
Godot the Lion is now the head of the ZLF and thus the final boss. This is kind of weird and a rarity in fighting games in general.
Godot is, like, fronted as the person who might be behind the ZLF, but you find out in everyone's character arc that he's not. And if you complete arcade mode without having to continue, you go to a bonus stage where you see the actual final boss, who is Shenlong.
Between the first two games, the new age of Breedbringers is the superior title, and is again also available on the PS3 store.
Again, it lags very easily, so I wouldn't recommend getting it unless that's your absolute only option. Like, emulate it on your computer if you have to.
Bloody Roar 3, no subtitle here, hit arcades in 2000, and once again, I've never seen this cabinet anywhere.
I actually have the instruction manual for the Bloody Roar 3 arcade version, and unlike 1 and 2, that's not a PCB, it's a disk drive arcade system that works in one of those, like, pop cab style cabinets. So that definitely exists too. It's just extremely rare.
Yo, you in the comments, that one Bloody Roar fan? Yeah, you know who you are. You ever seen a Bloody Roar 3 cab? Let me know.
I feel called out.
I don't know anymore. It seems whatever happened in the last game did nothing to quell the very X-Men style plot of humans versus beasties, and now there's a new evil force or...
So, human versus zoanthrope relations doesn't really play much of a role in Bloody Roar 3. It comes up in a couple of the endings, but the general plot is these symbols called crests start appearing on various zoanthropes. And there's a pattern emerging that when someone gets the crest, shortly thereafter, they show up dead. And this is all part of the machinations of Xeon, who is one of the new characters in 3, who thinks that by eliminating all these other people, that the power from this mystic relic called the Tabula will allow him to basically take over all of existence. It's kind of surprising I have to explain this, considering as he's mentioning all of this, the story dialogue for Xeon is on screen that explains some of what's going on.
Everyone from 2 is back, with the newest beastie on the block being Zion the Unborn.
I'm not sure where you got that pronunciation from. I don't think it's pronounced that way in any of the Bloody Roar games.
What is an unborn, you ask? Well, it's this thing, this Guyvery bad guy thing. Well, there's literally millions of different species on Earth. 18 were already kind of running out, I guess. It doesn't matter though, because Zion is still pretty cool.
So the idea of an unborn is it's a being that really hasn't had a chance to be born and as such has no definite form. I mean, he's right about the Guyver influence on it. I think that's pretty obvious to anyone who's seen that and then seen this. But it seems to come from like a pseudo-religious sort of background. I don't know what they were thinking with this, but yeah, that's sort of where that could have come from.
The original Bakuryu, this guy, is now back as a Seeker character, Koryu, and also has beef with his younger, hotter replacement.
So the deal with that one is, original Bakuryu died. He actually melted into like this biological fluid, and then that was used as a basis to create a cyborg version of him, which is Koryu.
There's also a new final boss, Uranus, who's honestly pretty cool.
Uranus is not really the final boss. She's the hidden boss, the one that you have to get to without continuing. Although, wait, I said Shenlong was the real boss. Okay, yeah, screw it.
Very Ivy-esque.
Hold on, I want to check something. Okay, I just wanted to verify. Ivy was in a Soul Calibur game in 1998. This game is from 2000, so you could make that comparison. Also, that thing I just did was looking up information to make sure that what I was saying was going to be true. Just a note.
Bloody Roar 3 is also a great option for anyone that only has access to a PS2, as its mechanics didn't really evolve much after this point, although...
That's not true either. There were minor tweaks that were made to most of the characters in between each iteration. There were certain lines that you can follow for certain characters in one game that you can't use in another because it simply doesn't work.
Bloody Roar Primal Fury is not so much a sequel, but a soft reboot / special edition / sequel to 3.
It is none of those things. It is a spin-off of the series. I actually found what I think is the origin of the confusion involving Primal Fury / Extreme, which is a particular IGN review of Primal Fury in which they erroneously stated that it was a port of 3. I don't know how you can play both of those games and then come to that conclusion. That's like saying Mortal Kombat 2 is a port of Mortal Kombat 1.
Naming discrepancies are still in full force, because in Japan, this version was titled Bloody Roar Extreme, which will only get more confusing later.
Extreme is actually an updated version of Primal Fury. Primal Fury came out first. Extreme came out later and had several gameplay tweaks made to it, to the point that Extreme is arguably, from a technical standpoint, the most complex of the Bloody Roar games. This is where they added like extra abilities tied to hyperforms. They changed up the inherent abilities of each character. Lines were changed. You had more options to break off combos and go into different ones. Granted, that gets even more confusing when you realize the Xbox version is just called Extreme Everywhere.
Basically, there's now an entire society of Zoanthrope worshippers who have sprung up from out of nowhere, who simultaneously have ancient and advanced technology, and they decide to hold a fighting tournament.
If you're going to do a retrospective like this, I can understand trying to inject humor into it, but you're just blatantly ignoring a bunch of key stuff to the game. So what's actually happening is you have a place called the Kingdom of Zoanthropes, which is offering a safe haven to like Zoanthropes of the world so that they can escape human persecution. In the process, though, there's rumors that they're experimenting on various Zoanthropes within the kingdom. To save face, they're holding a fighting tournament among Zoanthropes with a cash prize. So yes, this is the one and only game in the series that has a tournament.
Apparently, 18 were impressed with the GameCube specs and decided to rework everything to take advantage of it.
That's actually true. I gotta give him credit for that. There was, I think it was an IGN interview where one of the people working on the game specifically pointed out GameCube's lighting capabilities as the reason that they went to the GameCube. Also, there was probably less fighting game competition at the time on the GameCube. It's like you and Smash Brothers.
There's Ganesha, the elephant, who presides over the Zoanthrope kingdom.
Ganesha does not preside over the Zoanthrope kingdom. He's basically the bodyguard of Kronos.
The new final boss, Kronos, complete with 2 beast forms, a penguin, included because it won a fan poll, and his hyper beast form, a godlike phoenix.
The penguin didn't actually win the fan poll. That's something else that comes up later. It's just that Penguin and Phoenix were 2 options that ranked very highly in the fan poll.
Fang the Wolf was a character from an obscure Bloody Roar manga and was basically just evil Yugo.
Fang was not evil Yugo at all. He's actually the main protagonist of the manga. And one of the first things he does in the manga is rescue the female lead from a teacher who's been experimenting on his students to create artificial zoanthropes. So yeah, he's the good guy the entire time. I have no idea. Like, this could be a thing where Matt's joking and it's just not coming off as that. But, like, okay, I might as well just get into it now. There's another person who tried doing their own Bloody Roar retrospective, and it's very clear that they copy-pasted a bunch of stuff from this video. Like, if you compare them side by side, you'll notice that they use a lot of the same terminology, a lot of the same jokes, and even specifically cite evil Yugo, which Fang isn't.
Fang the Wolf was a character from an obscure Bloody Roar manga and was basically just evil Yugo.
Like Fang the Wolf. He was a character from the Bloody Roar manga. It was pretty much the evil version of Hugo.
While his costume appears as an outfit in the North American version of Primal Fury,
who was only in the Japanese versions of the game. He was a skin in America though.
And that's part of the reason that I'm doing this, is that the misinformation in this video, because Matt is seen as this higher figure on YouTube in regard to video games, people take his word at face value, even if it's incorrect. And that gets parroted, and that's basically what happened with Primal Fury being called a port of 3, even though it's a spin-off. People just looked at that review and said, okay, I guess it's a port, and then just labeled it that way, to the point that Primal Fury didn't even have a Wikipedia page until a couple of fans stepped in and said, what are you doing?
While its costume appears as an outfit in the North American version of Primal Fury,
it does not. Fang does not appear at all in Primal Fury in any form.
Primal Fury also continued the tradition that more or less started with Bloody Roar 3. Tons of unlockables.
The unlockables were a thing from the very first game, so I'm not sure where the tons of unlockable thing stemmed from, 3 in particular. He even cited earlier in the video that there were a bunch of unlockables in the earlier games, so I'm not sure why that's there.
There weren't really any new additions in terms of mechanics or moves per se, but there was one noticeable omission: blood.
So there are a number of mechanical changes. Like I mentioned earlier, there are new in-game abilities tied to each individual character, plus abilities that only come out when they're in hyperform. Hyperform was completely changed so that you can do it multiple times in a single round, let alone in a match. People's movesets were adjusted. A few people got counter moves. Like Sheena has the move where she can grab your leg and then put you in a half crab. And again, this comes off like Matt is trying to do it completely from memory. And it's not as though the resources to find this out aren't out there. There's an entire wiki just for this game, breaking down all of the mechanics, all of the frame data for everything. And it's kind of baffling that that never came into play for this.
For whatever reason, Bloody Roar replaced its usual arterial spray with sparks.
That was actually started in 3, although this is the first game where they omitted it completely. I erroneously said in my Bloody Roar 3 video that the blood was gone. What they actually did was they turned it off by default, and then you had to go through the options and then turn it back on. That one little mistake in that video still bothers me all these years later. So how does Matt feel about making this amount of mistakes in this video?
Well, not a terrible or broken game, it's a step back from Primal Fury and Bloody Roar 3 in a number of subtle but important ways.
Bloody Roar 4 is actually extremely broken. I've had multiple times where the victory screen faded out and the game locked up. I've had instances where voice audio will either not play at all or double or triple over itself. Character models will spaz out if they hit a certain part of a level. And that's ignoring that there's a character in this that, because they broke the health system, so you have a human bar and a beast bar, and normally if you took damage in beast form, both bars would go down. Here, only the beast bar goes down, which means there is no strategy to the game. You just go into beast form and then stay in beast form the entire time. And the reason that's so broken is there's a character in the game that is actually 2 separate people. It's a puppet character. And there's a button you can hold to sacrifice your human health and fill up your beast gauge, which is a horrible thing to do. The AI loves doing it for some reason, even though they're basically forfeiting half of their health for the entire fight. But the point is, for that puppet character, the beast bar is attached to the second character. So you can regenerate health and your human bar doesn't go down. The character effectively has infinite health and can spam infinite beast drives. And that's without doing anything with hyperform. The AI in certain modes in this is supposed to get more difficult, but because the Western version of it is so rushed, that doesn't happen. For career mode in particular, you just go through it and the difficulty of it never gets past what round 2 or 3 or 4 in arcade mode would be like, which is to say not very hard at all. Career mode is the only way you can unlock things, and you have to hit certain point thresholds in it, but they didn't make sure that there were enough fights in career mode to hit all of those point thresholds, which essentially means you have to treat it like an RPG and grind for several hours to get some of the final unlockables. Also, the damage in this game is wildly unbalanced. Busuzima has a throw move where he knocks you to the ground and farts on your face. That does more damage than most characters' beast drives. Try not to think about that too hard.
The menu's a little uglier, and the voice acting from the previous 2 games are gone, replaced with stuff like this.
What are you talking about?
So another thing that's broken about this game is it was so rushed that they made this game on the renderware engine for whatever reason. And if you own a North American copy of Bloody Roar 4, you basically own a copy of the renderware development kit. They left it on the disc. See, I did a retrospective on this series years ago. I didn't know everything about Bloody Roar then. I still don't know everything about Bloody Roar now. But I'm just constantly learning stuff about this series.
Exactly 1 year ago, during the X-Genome Code incident, there were many riots on Earth by beasts that were not in the XGC.
I'm going to give Matt a bit of a pass for glossing over this story and not necessarily getting things right, because 4 retcons a bunch of stuff and then makes a bunch of stuff extremely complicated in a very stupid way. To the point that some of the character endings just seem like giant contradictions and wastes of time.
Oh, look, I gave Yuriko a pass, and gave Zion a pass, but no, absolutely big disgust here for Nagi. There's millions of animals in the world. Never mind.
Part of the reason Nagi's form is like that is because the name Spurious basically means like imitation, sort of. And Nagi's backstory is she was another person who was killed by Zeon and then was brought back to life by Gaia using part of the Unborn's essence, which is why she has some characteristics of the Unborn, but not really. Also, she's incarnated as a different person, and yet other people still recognize her from before she was... BR4 is extremely stupid.
He's fine. His human design is really plain, though, looking like a random grunt from Beatdown Fists of Vengeance.
I mean, he's kind of right. I mean, I described him as Newgrounds fighting game character, but that might actually be a better description.
And his crow form is also fine, although it has some similarities in animations to both Jenny's and Kronos's.
The big issue with Reiji is that in his beast form, feathers will fall off, and those can cause certain stages of the game to lag. If you're facing Reiji in either the freezing space or the sewer, you are guaranteed to have the game slow to a crawl, to the point that a 10-second round can take like 20 seconds.
To unlock these idiots, you have to beat arcade mode.
You don't unlock them by beating arcade mode. All the unlockables in this game are handled through career mode, which is a whole other convoluted mess.
And Puff the Magic Dragon over here is no pushover.
He actually is a pushover. All you have to do for this fight is just back up and force him to use a beast drive. Because there's one that will just completely drain his health, and then you just run up to him, flick him in the forehead, and you win.
Kronos and Uranus are not easy fights either, but you have as many tries as you need to beat them.
For Kronos, yes. For Uranus, you had one shot. And then if you didn't unlock her then, you had to go through arcade mode again without using any continues, and then beat her when you got to her.
What might be worse than all of this is that a bunch of older characters are now also locked because fuck you.
I am 100% on Matt's side on this one. What the fuck?
We're not done. Koryu, Uranus, and most tragic of all, Sheena are all locked. God, is there any way to get them aside from beating arcade mode, you ask?
Again, that doesn't work. You have to go through career mode.
Go through a bunch of random fights while slowly accruing DNA points or whatever bloody roar bucks to then cash in for your desired fighter.
You don't cash in the points for the fighter, you just automatically unlock them when you hit certain thresholds. The points are used to unlock extra abilities to tie to your fighter, such as like being able to jump higher, being able to use beast drives from another character on your own, which causes a bunch of weird issues with animations not lining up, so characters just start spazzing out as they're doing other people's moves. But that's what the points are for.
Usually you gain beast energy by fighting or taking damage, but now you can also manually charge your beast meter, but this takes from your first health pool. It's a stupid change that doesn't really do anything aside from making matches longer.
Yeah, I couldn't remember if he mentioned this, but yeah, he's 100% right on this. Also, something he hasn't mentioned about this is another really broken mechanic, which is some characters you can just hold block and they'll evade everything. Why?
Now, it's true that most characters now have a third beast drive, but they aren't particularly good.
They were good before this. Bloody Roar 4 beast drives as a whole are pretty bad.
Again, the signs of a thrown-together sequel with a limited budget.
You say limited budget, but they did shell out to have a Japanese singer/model promote the game. And have a contest to meet said Japanese singer/model. Who also made some really embarrassing promotional posters for the game.
This is the only Bloody Roar game rated mature, and is in stark contrast to BR3's more conservative take on violence.
I don't know if it was the amount of blood, or that they kept showing, like, upskirts of Nagi during some of the cutscenes. Either or. I don't know how that rating works.
Now comprised of in-game cinematics and voiceovers, their terribleness is only equal to their awkwardness.
Here? Now this is a fine place.
I actually spoke to someone who knows one of the voice actors from this game. And according to them, they were basically asked if they knew English, were put into like a recording booth, told, you're voicing this character who's a mole in this case, and then just given lines of dialogue to say. They had absolutely no context for what they were doing. They didn't know who their character really was, what game they were voicing for, and then this is the result when you treat voices like that. Also, a bunch of the voice actors were not actually voice actors. A number of them were actually musicians, which is kind of a very Konami thing to do.
Honestly though, you can just look these up on YouTube and save yourself some money from buying the game, especially since eBay prices are probably higher than they should be.
The reason the eBay prices are so high is because Bloody Roar 4 sold terribly. It was the lowest selling game in the series, even lower than Bloody Roar 1, and I think Bloody Roar 2 was the best selling one? I can't remember. I know that was really high on the list, but that's why the price is going up. It's not because it's good. Price is more indicative of availability than quality.
But aside from that, the Roars have remained silent ever since. As far as anyone knows, Konami still owns the IP, maybe Hudson does, but...
Well, Hudson doesn't really exist anymore, but if you look up the trademark for it, Konami actually renewed the trademark for Bloody Roar not too long ago. So yes, they do still own that. And they're aware that they own that.
And while it was very much a rental for most people, I proudly own Primal Fury and put dozens of hours into it. I even made my own personal FAQs for the game.
So, there's an online community that still actively plays Extreme online. I'm curious how Matt would do against some of the people in that community, because some of them are absolutely ridiculous. Okay, that's what I was wondering, because I know Matt sometimes has other people writing on this, but he wrote all of it himself. I don't expect Matt to actually watch this. Matt, I'm a fan of what you do, but the amount of mistakes made in this, and the magnitude of some of them, makes me wonder how much you've gotten wrong in other videos for things that I'm not as familiar with. We're going to make mistakes. I've made mistakes. Multiple times. But every time I make a mistake, I try to learn what I did wrong, what to look for next time, so that I don't end up making that mistake again. I will give Matt credit though, at least he's not like the guy I mentioned before who just copied what Matt said to a large degree, who, unlike Matt, will hide comments from everybody who points out anything that he gets wrong. And on the off chance that Matt actually does watch this video, hit me up and I'll get you an invite to the Bloody Roar Discord, because there is so much you can learn from that resource.